I received a Christmas card. This was the scene on the Christmas card. There was the manger scene, Mary and Joseph and the baby. The baby was in a cradle. There were the shepherds there. There were the wise men. And a little drummer boy as well, too. In case you're wondering, this advertisement was brought to you by Hallmark. Because it's not exactly the picture of how it really happened. On the night when Jesus was born, the angel and the angels appeared to the shepherds, and they came. And they saw Mary and Jesus, their father Joseph, and they understood, and they were filled with joy. But not the Magi, not the wise men. They didn't appear for a while later. As a matter of fact, when they came to visit with Mary and Joseph and Jesus, they were living in a home. They were already established in the town of Bethlehem. Joseph had opened up his shop, and he was doing business. And they had moved up from a stable to a little tiny house. It's important to put it in this chronological order so we can understand and picture it clearly. And there are some things in this encounter, and we've been looking at the various encounters from God to people. And there's something in this encounter which is similar to the others, to Mary and Joseph and to the shepherds, but some things that are very distinctive to this one in particular. The things that they have in common is that in these encounters, in all these encounters, you see this faithfulness, you see this dedication, this commitment. God speaks and they act, they react, they respond, they do something, and they're blessed. In the case of the wise men, it's the same. God speaks, they act, they react, they go looking. But this is also very unique. Because in this one here, you see deception. You see and encounter fear. There is bloodshed. There is injustice. There is homelessness. It's kind of like a real world situation, isn't it? In the Christmas story. After traveling for about 2,000 kilometers, the wise men who are seeking Jesus arrive in what they believe to be the proper location. They arrive in Jerusalem. After all, who are they seeking? They're seeking the one who is born the King of the Jews. And so they go to the religious center of Israel, which is Jerusalem. And they ask what they consider to be a very normal, natural question. Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? But the reception to them and this question probably took them aback a little bit. They were surprised, I think, at the reception. I kind of love the way it puts it in the Bible. It says that Herod and all of Jerusalem were disturbed. And I looked at that and I said, unless you really dig into the meaning of that word, it's kind of an understatement. In another translation, I read that they were worried. Thinking about Herod, I don't think it really describes how he was feeling. Let me describe a little bit to you. Herod. Herod is so cruel, Herod is so mean, that not all the bad things that he did are recorded in history. That's how bad he was. He had killed people in his own government. He had killed people in his own family. If he thought for a moment that somebody was going to try to take his throne, he was paranoid. He would eliminate them immediately. The Emperor Augustus once said of Herod, it was better to be Herod's dog than his child, because he was so cruel. So when you think about this picture of Herod, and you put this term disturbed or worried, I don't think it's adequate. You have to really look into that word, the Greek, to understand it. And because of this, the wise men coming and making this statement, there were over 30, maybe 40 children, innocent children, who were killed as a result of this. And the sad reality is, Herod was so brutal that there's no historical recording of this event. It's, in other words, it's like saying, oh, it's just another thing that Herod did that was terrible. That's how bad he was. Now, when I read this too, and I think about it, the Bible tells us that the Magi were warned in a dream not to return to Herod. I think the alarms already were off in their head, and then when God came to them, we went, oh yeah, we can see that. We can see that. But not only not to Herod, but they didn't go back to Jerusalem, because the religious leaders weren't open to this at all either. Think about this for a second. Who told Herod everything? When Herod finds out about this, what does he do? He calls the religious leaders together. He says, what's going on? Now think about this for a moment. If you're a religious leader and you know the Bible, you know the Old Testament, and somebody comes along and says, what is this I heard about wise men seeking he who was born king of the Jews? Wouldn't you be stopping and thinking, well, hey, this is an important event. And we're not going to tell Herod because Herod's going to try to kill this person. So we're going to keep it a secret. Do they do that? It says in the Bible, they told everything. They quoted from the prophet Micah. And he says it in chapter 5 and verse 2. And it's recorded in Matthew 2 and 6. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people. Now think about it. They have told Herod the exact location to find this person. And what do you think Herod's going to do? And don't you think that they're aware of this too? They knew full well what Herod's actions were going to be. But if they believed, if they really believed the Bible, if they really believed, they would have done everything to protect the Messiah, including risking their own lives. And instead of warning the Magi, the wise men, they don't say anything to them at all. You know, it's a sad reality that back in those days, such atrocities were all too common. As I said, it was so commonplace for Herod to do terrible things like that this wasn't even recorded in history because it's just another one of his atrocities. But it's still devastating. When terrible things like happen, then, as much as today, it's still painful. It hurts people. Matthew quotes from Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 15, when he says in chapter 2 and verse 18, he says, a voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. They're killed, they're gone. And a lot of people are terribly, terribly, terribly upset. But then also, think about this. Jesus may have become a victim of this terribly, terrible, cruel act. Were it not for God speaking to Joseph, but listen again, and for the faithfulness and dedication of Joseph, who, when he heard, got up in the middle of the night, woke Mary up in the middle of the night, and said, we have to go now. Isn't it wonderful that God speaks to people and people listen? God speaks to people, but do we listen? Jesus said in Luke chapter 11, verse 28, blessed rather are those who hear the word of God and obey. You got it right. And obey. We're blessed because of Joseph's obedience. We are blessed because of our obedience. We're blessed when we listen to God and obey. You know, one of the nicest gifts you could ever get anybody at all, is listening. really listening, really tuning in, and then acting on what they say. It's a beautiful gift. You don't have to wrap it up and put it under the tree. You can give it right now if you want. Just listen to people. Really listen, really tune in. So again, we see this because of Joseph's obedience. Mary and Jesus are kept safe, and they escape to Egypt. Let's sort of work that scenario for a few minutes. They escape to Egypt. This is the country where they came from, right? Where they were slaves. And they came out of Egypt, and they finally were liberated and brought to the land of Israel. And now we find that there's a large expatriate community of Jewish people where in Egypt, escaping the tyranny of Herod. And now Jesus, with his mother and Joseph, have fled to Egypt. So think about it for a second. They are refugees. They are refugees. They arrive in a country with nothing. Yes, something when you think about it, that God can really relate to so many people through his own experiences. He can understand so many people. Let's get back to the Magi for a second. So Matthew chapter 2 and verse 10. And thank you, Judy, for reading all of that. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother. Did you hear that? To the house, okay? Just want to make sure you understand. And they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened up their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. Think about that for a second. God goes from a manger and a stable to a tiny little hovel of a house in our standards. It's not like the house that you see on Home Alone. Not at all like that, okay? This is a tiny, tiny, tiny little house. He probably has a shop inside his house. And this is an unexpected scene for people to find he who was born, King of the Jews. And yet they're not surprised. They're not taken aback. They don't look at this and say, this is not at all what we expected. They walk in, they encounter everybody, and they give their gifts, and they bow down and worship him. There was a Christmas song written many, many years ago by a fellow by the name of William Billings. And he put it this way here. Seek not in courts or palaces, nor royal curtain drawn, but search the stable and see your God extended on the straw. See, the problem is for a lot of people back then and today is that Jesus wasn't what they expected. He wasn't what they would have expected. And when I was thinking about that, I was thinking about that statement, you've heard about it, from the wrong side of the tracks. You ever heard that one there? From the wrong side of the tracks. I always wondered about that, because you're either from one side or the other. Eventually you're going to find some tracks, right? Or if you can't, just make tracks of your own. But anyways, let's get back to this. In John chapter 1 and verse 46, here we see the scene where Nathanael is being introduced to Jesus. And what does Nathanael say? I love this statement. It just blurts it right out. He's just honest and real. He says, Nazareth? Can anything good come from there? He's from the wrong side of the tracks. He doesn't have the credentials that we're expecting. Can anything good come out of that environment there? We lived in France for a number of years. And we had a wonderful ministry. And I'll leave it at that. We had a wonderful ministry. But we had a continual problem. See, when we moved to France, we could speak French, but we spoke Quebecois French. And you know what they think of Quebecois French? It's the language of, as they would say, les paysans. Peasants. It's a colonialist attitude towards Quebec. And Jude and I could speak French. But when we got there, they looked down at us. Oh, you speak the language of the peasants. Actually, I found out something interesting while we were living in Paris. We thought Paris was it, but they did too. They believed that Paris was the center of the universe. When we moved outside, or we went outside to other communities, we found that they loved our Quebecois French. because that was their way of speaking French, but not in Paris. And you see, because we didn't speak their language, and I spent months relearning French. I learned the vocabulary, I learned the grammar, I learned their perfect accent, and I had that down absolutely almost flawless. And yet, because I wasn't from France and from Paris, well, we weren't good enough. We were from the other side of the tracks. You see, everything Jesus bothered the religious elite. He didn't act like a king that they expected. And Herod overlooked his authority because he only sees as a child. Jesus never demonstrated the power that people recognize as a sign of authority. Think about that for a moment. When you look in the annals of history, they overlook Jesus when they're considering who are people, great people of history. They overlook Jesus. And I was reading about that, and they were highlighting actually one person. I highlighted Genghis Khan. Oh, I tell you, I'd love to have him as a neighbor, as long as he was 10,000 miles away. And here's some facts about Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan, actually, his empire was the largest contiguous empire in the world that the world has ever seen. Contiguous means this. You see, Britain had the largest empire in the world, 12 million square miles. But his, Genghis Khan, stretched from one end to the other non-stop. And it was 9 million square miles. It encompassed over 100 million people. This is what the world looks at and said, that's greatness, right? He also was responsible for killing 10% of the world's population at that time. Is that what the world looks at as greatness? I think I have a problem here with that. But that's what they see. Now let's take a look at Mongolia today. Mongolia is a country of 3.4 million people. Its economy is rated at the 129th in the entire world. It's a very poor country. And where is Genghis Khan today? They can't even find his grave. Where is he? See, in the world, a lot of leaders, they start off poor, they end up powerful, and then they die. That's just the way it goes. They die. But Jesus, God, is different. There's a poem written by Lyle Rawlings. I'd like to share this with you. It's called The Greatest Man in History. Jesus had no servants, yet they called him master. Had no degree, yet they called him teacher. Had no medicines, yet they called him healer. He had no army, yet kings feared him. He won no military battles, yet he conquered the world. He did not live in a castle, yet they called him Lord. He ruled no nations, yet they called him king. He committed no crime, yet they crucified him. He was buried in a tomb, yet he lives today. I feel honored to serve such a leader who loves us. Isn't that wonderful? That's who Jesus is. That's who Jesus is. You see, God started with great power. And then he became, in the world's eye, very weak. But he ended again where? With great power. That's the way God does things. And it's sad that so many people overlook him. And it's very much like Herod and the religious leaders, how they overlooked him. Because they didn't see in him what they wanted. What they wanted. And for this reason too, Romans chapter 8 and verse 7, Paul puts it this way here. The mind governed by the flesh is hostile to God. Hostile to God. And the New Living Translation puts it, the mind that thinks only of ways to please the sinful person. But the term there they want to look at is hostile. And the Greek word is eshta. And the Greek word actually means hate. It's very strong, it's very clear, very definite. Hate. And Herod is the epitome of hate, isn't he? He hates anything that gets in his way. I am the king. There's nobody else like me. He is completely self-centered. He is completely self-absorbed. It's a good thing we don't see people like that today, right? Self-centered and self-absorbed. That only happened back in those days. Right. And then the religious leaders, the elite, they were self-centered. They were self-righteous. They were self-absorbed. And they overlooked the obvious. I wrote these words down. Now, these are really powerful words, and I wrote them down. This is what they thought. When you look at how they responded. When they heard about the wise men coming, they thought, well, why wouldn't God tell us first? After all, we're the gatekeepers. We're the ones that hold the keys to understanding the Bible. How dare God tell them? Who does he think he is? I know those are powerful words, but I think it's pretty accurate. There's terrible things that happen in this world this day. It's true. It's so sad. We need to continue to pray for those who are impacted by the cruelties of people who are self-centered and self-absorbed. But let's carry this on a little bit further. And this isn't very comfortable, and I'm going to tell you that right up front. You see, we don't like to feel that we in any way, shape, or form can be equated to somebody that cruel. That's Herod. But the Bible tells us this in Isaiah chapter 53 and verse 6. It says, all we. Okay, is that pretty inclusive, all-inclusive? It includes me anyways. If you don't feel comfortable, I'm going to leave that up to you, but it includes me. All we like sheep, Linda and Phil know of sheep, have gone astray. Have sheep ever gone astray? And when one goes astray, do the others tend to want to follow in that same path? All we like sheep have gone astray. Each has turned to their own way. I was telling somebody the other day, when Judy and I heard that we were having twins, I was grateful. And they said, why are you grateful? I said, because I was worried we were going to have triplets. I said, it's one thing when you got two kids running in different directions at the same time, but when you got three, what do? All we like sheep have gone astray, each turning to their own way. And then I love this part here, because this is Christmas, and the Lord has laid on him, Jesus, the iniquity of us all. And here's another reality too. No one of us, without the help of God, can willingly submit to his authority. As good as we think we are, we needed his help. And we continually need his help to submit to God's authority. Paul told the Romans in this in chapter 5 and verse 11, but we also boast in God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we now receive reconciliation. You see, it comes from God and God alone. Isn't that wonderful? God draws us to him. God draws us to him, even at Christmas. With all the things that can be a distraction, God is drawing us to him. And we need to recognize the incarnation, that God became a man, and then allow God to be a real part of our life, impacting our lives from within. The question that the Magi asked, where is he who was born King of the Jews? I turn that around. Where is the true King today? Where is he in our lives? For he no longer resides in Bethlehem as a little babe, but in the hearts of those who open their lives to him. Christmas sounds all too good to be true sometimes. But the fact is, it is true. As I shared with you earlier on from 1 John chapter 1, when John was making this, he was making a statement. It's like in a court, and he was using that type of terminology to say, this is true, this is real, this is reality. God became a man, and we have seen it, we have heard it, and we have touched it. And we've allowed it to change our lives. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And because of that, what is available to us is salvation, redemption, hope, joy, and love. And it came wrapped in a cloth and lying in a manger. In Galatians chapter 4 it says, "But when the set time had fully come, God sent his own Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law, that we might receive adoption to sonship." Isn't that wonderful? Let me just close with the words of a poem from Christina Rossetti. "What can I give him, poor as I am? If I were a shepherd, I'd give him a lamb. If I were a wise man, I would do my part. Yet what can I give him? I give him my